There's a group of people playing golf together, and this is Great Britain is a great place to talk about golf, right? And and this group is created by the power players of the current status quo, the current system. These would be the great industrial food conglomerates and the government agriculture schools and the government agriculture ministers. This is essentially a fraternity of ideas that has created an orthodoxy of thought and confined the rest of us to the heretic bench, if you will. And to say that animals should be outside rather than inside, that violates the orthodoxy of this fraternity that says animals should be inside, and all sick animals are simply pharmaceutically disadvantaged. Heretics like me say that a sick animal is indicative of some breakdown in the immunological terrain that has allowed pathology or toxicity to enter that organism. I find that we learn a lot more about life and about true healing and wellness when we view sickness as a litmus test of immunological function. And so the question is, how do we make a wellness farm, a farm that doesn't need a vet, a farm that doesn't need pharmaceuticals, a farm that doesn't pollute the water or lose soil or make nutrient deficient food? And to ask those kinds of questions actually violates the orthodoxy of this fraternity of powers that be that make a lot of money off of sickness and remediating things that they've created by a mechanical view of biology. Goodness, if you got the pattern right in the first place, they'd all be out of business because farmers wouldn't have to patronize them with all their wealth and income to remediate the problems that their mentality has created. I'm Joel Salatin, co-owner of Polyface Farm in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, USA. So at Polyface, we sell, for example, salad bar beef. This is beef that's finished right on grass. No silage, no grain, straight off of grass. Looking at nature and saying, how does nature finish deer or wildebeests or elephants or giraffes or whatever? They're moved. They're moving every day. They're mobbed up. And they're mowing. So moving, mobbing, and mowing becomes that template of nature that we then lay down on a domestic production model and duplicate the moving, mobbing, and mowing on a daily basis. We never bought into feeding our cows or dead sheep, not because we hated science or we're anti-progressive or we're Luddites. It's because there's not a template in nature in which herbivores eat carrion. So we're honoring the cowness of the cow, the herbivoreness of the herbivore in appreciating that distinction. We follow the cows with an eggmobile, and the eggmobile is the birds. In nature you look at herbivore herds, and guess what? You see birds following them, scratching through the dung, the egret on the rhino's nose that's picking out the insects and the bugs. There's a symbiotic relationship between birds and herbivores. So we follow the cows with the eggmobiles, and the chickens scratch through the cow patties and eat at the grasshoppers and crickets that are exposed in the newly grazed grass, and create another income stream and a sanitation procedure for the cows. We make compost with pigs. We mix corn into the bedding under the cows. It ferments. The pigs then go in and dig in the corn and aerate it through their digging, and that gives the pigs a hog heaven because they love to do that, and gets compost made at the same time. Winter hoop houses. We put pigs and chickens and rabbits up above chickens, so the chickens can scratch through what the rabbits are dropping and compost the bedding with aeration, so the rabbits aren't living above this nitrogen vapor that's coming up above them. So all this is a very carefully choreographed dance of multi-speciation on the pasture that the secret is the salad bar, the fresh daily salad bar through chickens and turkeys and rabbits and cows and pigs, that is the secret to the folic acid, the omega-3, omega-6 comparison, polyunsaturated fats, conjugated linoleic acid, riboflavin, 300% higher. I mean, there's no comparison in the quality of the food when it's ingesting large amounts, when animals are ingesting large amounts of grass, and for that matter, when vegetables are grown in an organic matter, humus-rich soil. It's the same thing. It sweetens everything and creates more nutrient density in the food product. My philosophy is that we're actually simply looking at natural templates like patterns, and we're trying to cut around those templates and duplicate those patterns on a commercial domestic production model by laying them down, on the ground, if you will, and just cutting around those patterns. Those patterns are, things like animals move. There's no ecosystem that has no animals. Soil is built with perennials, not annuals. Nature doesn't move carbon very far. In nature, there's no waste. All animals have a habitat that allows them to fully express their distinctiveness. Food security is localized, not globalized. In other words, a community that can't feed itself is fairly food insecure. And we should have more farmers instead of fewer farmers, and people are part of the ecosystem. They're not, it's not environmentalism by abandonment, it's environmentalism by participation. So, those are just some of the basic principles.
How have we got in this position? How is it that we as a society, politicians particularly, but maybe all of us, just don't understand these fundamentals about the way the world works?
Well, I think one of our fallacies as humans is we have short memories, and all of us struggle with these short memories. And so when we look at the way the world works, we're looking at it very myopically, almost provincially, if you will, seeing only a slice of it in our lifetime. And some of these large trends we just don't see until it's too late. I mean, you can look at books like Collapse and Guns, Germs, and Steel and things like that that describe how civilizations wax and wane through time, and part of that is simply our memory spans are too short to appreciate to appreciate biology's timetable. Starting in, perhaps this side of the Industrial Revolution, if you will, we as a civilization began looking at biology as fundamentally mechanical rather than biological, looking at life as fundamentally mechanical rather than biological. And so, I mean, beginning with Justus von Liebig, the Austrian, who told us in 1837 that all of life is just a rearrangement of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, started us down this path of extreme a mechanical view toward life as opposed to a biological view. And that's very dangerous, because as soon as you go to a mechanical view of life, it takes the sacredness and the respect and honor and specialness of beings, of living beings, and out of the equation, and they just become more widgets in an inanimate pile, just another pile of inanimate protoplasmic structure to be manipulated however cleverly we can do it. And so instead of having these very complex, symbiotic, synergistic, multi-speciated relationships like nature has, we just look at it like a factory of input, output, a linear deal, in this direction, out that direction, and we add pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, buildings, and equipment, and out the other end squirts food. And that's an extremely segregated, factory-oriented mentality that to what is actually a very complex, intricate biological dance of life. We think that animals shouldn't move. They should be all locked in houses. We think that agriculture should be primarily an annual tillage type of deal as opposed to a perennial thing. So all we're trying to do is minimize soil loss instead of create a system that actually builds soil. We think that it's fine to segregate carbon and not close carbon loops. So we bring fertilizer in from off the farm rather than seeing the farm as a solar reservoir that collects biomass like a big pond, and then has a very slow leak as that biomass decomposes and builds soil. So yeah, everything that we're doing in agriculture right now is quite counter to this natural template.
I was reading one of your articles last night in Acres USA, and you go through 10 things that farmers should know. Well, I won't ask you to go through all 10 of them, but there's a couple that stuck in my, I want to ask you about. One is to do with carbon accumulation. Well, over here, if you talk to most farmers and mention the word carbon, it's kind of like a turn-off. And yet, yeah, you see it rather differently.
Sure. Well, one of the things farmers need to understand is that the ecology fundamentally runs on carbon regeneration. I'm not talking about carbon credits and global warming and climate change and all that. I'm talking about the fundamental process of biomass accumulation and the decomposition that feeds the soil, that in turn creates the soil life to access the minerals, the enzymes, and the fertility that's in the soil, or to make more fertility in the soil. And this carbon cycle of solar energy to biomass that then lives and is digested either in an animal or in a compost pile or on the ground, that fundamental biomass to decomposition, to soil, to then new life, to new plants, is perhaps the most fundamental cycle in nature. It's not about environmentalism and radical the earth is warming or whatever. This is just a fundamental a mathematical formula, if you will, of how the world works and how soil is built up through biomass accumulation and decomposition, and then additional biomass being growing out of the decomposed ruins, if you will, of that previous biomass crop. The average farmer gets only roughly 25% of the full retail dollar. If we think about the full retail dollar, it's comprised of a portion from production, processing, marketing, and distribution. Marketing, distribution, and processing are those notorious middlemen that make all the profits. And so what I encourage farmers to realize is that little portion of the retail dollar from production is an extremely unstable leg because it's subject to weather, pestilence, disease, and price. But if the middlemen over here doing the processing, the marketing, and the distribution, if that's where the money is, why can't we farmers get a piece of that pie? Why can't we wear a few more of those hats of marketing, processing, and distribution and enjoy some of the business stability from loading some of our income into these non-weather, pestilence, price, fragile income streams? And so as we move to these other legs, to create differentiation in the marketplace, to create a margin that allows us as small farmers to survive, what this means is we have to produce a higher quality product by definition in order to compete. And that higher quality product has been labeled artisanal rather than commodity, because it is. It's the difference between an artisanal potter, making a vase on his potter wheel one at a time, and something that's turned out from, say, China, by the thousand, that sells for a penny a vase. And so that is one of the big differences between artisanal and commodity, and artisanal has now come to represent everything that has integrity. We're talking about an integrity, nutrient-dense, ecologically accountable food system, and that is artisanal.
You talked about we need more people in agriculture, and we certainly do in the UK, and yet what we're seeing is land prices. We're in a sort of mini bubble for land prices. When a small farm comes for sale, the neighbour buys it and pays enormous money for it. Have you got a message of optimism for the young people?
One of the favorite things that we're doing at our farm is germinating new young farmers. And so the beauty of our, rotational pasture idea is that the infrastructure, the shelter for the chickens, the shelter for the turkeys, the shelter for the egg layers, the shelter for the rabbits, the shelter for the cows, the shelter for the pigs, and the infrastructure is portable. So we have a portable farm. And when you have a portable farm, it can go anywhere. You don't have to own the land. And so you have a mobile operation. And that allows you to farm nooks and crannies, places that are too small or off the beaten path or abandoned. You can even add a pastured poultry operation under existing orchards or on an existing crop farm or on an existing dairy or beef cattle farm. You can piggyback this portable farm with portable infrastructure on somebody else's owned land. This drastically reduces the capitalization costs of entry. The problem is when the capitalization costs of entry in any economic sector of the economy is too high for young people to enter. If young people can't get in, old people can't get out. And so by reducing this capitalization cost with portable infrastructure, direct marketing, and artisanal product owning the middlemen components, or at least getting a piece of that, suddenly it makes that startup germinated farm viable, and young people can get in and make white collar salaries without any indebtedness at all. And that's an exciting thing to do.
So is it a question of if you're farming mixed with other farmers, particularly those that think in these creative ways outside the box? Is that...
Well, yeah, I'm a big believer in finding your tribe, because the fact is, there are few things that are as unappreciated as unsolicited advice. And so, so what you need to do is find people that will encourage you in your mindset. Don't waste your time trying to convince a naysayer. There's an old saying, there's no sense trying to teach a pig how to fly. It can't be done and it irritates the pig. So find your cheerleader, find your encourager, find your partners, and together you can collaborate and move forward rather than just being beaten down and depressed over being frustrated that other people can't see what seems to be obvious to you.
You used the phrase a few years ago, forgiveness farming. I wonder if you could say a bit about that.
Sure. Nature's not always a friend. There's wind, there's drought, floods, cold, hot. I mean, nature's not always just, a beautiful day like today out here. And so part of the mandate, I think, on land stewardship, people who own land or farmland, part of the mandate is to build forgiveness into the landscape. You can call it resiliency, you can call it being able to withstand shocks, whatever. But the point is, we want infrastructure and land development that is less fragile. And if there's one thing that's less fragile, it is perennial crops as opposed to annual crops. Annual crops are extremely fragile, not only to get them planted, but to get them germinated, to get weeds out of them, to get them harvested. Perennial grasses, pastured products, they just last. A drought, they might turn brown, but you know what? They bounce right back. They're not dead for the season. And so perennial crops, perennial things, trees and grass, they last through these vagaries of weather. Water is a big issue. So we need to be building ponds, hydrating the landscape. I know that in the last year here, a lot of Britons would say, we don't need to hydrate the landscape, we need to drain the landscape. But the thing is, a pond actually does both things. In flood times, it collects water, and in drought times, you can release water gently and slowly. And so, massaging this ecological umbilical with a participatory ecological situation, we could even call it caressing our earth womb, okay, if we want to get really, woo-woo about this. Doing that actually builds forgiveness into the landscape so that when there's a flood, we hold it up high on the landscape so it doesn't make the rivers overflow downstream, so it's neighbor friendly. And if there's a drought, we have all this water impounded uphill that we can let gradually release downhill and let those raindrops do lots of things as they ease downhill. So, you know, there are lots of ways to build forgiveness into the landscape, including increasing the immunity of our animals. You know, we don't help our immune system with mandatory vaccinations, mandatory annihilation if some animals get sick, mandatory pharmaceuticals. That doesn't help our immune systems. That simply destroys the robustness of our genetic stock. So we need to be figuring out how do we increase these immune systems, and we increase them by not reaching for the pharmaceutical jar all the time, but actually letting a Darwinian genetic base occur on our farm so that, yes, some animals die. Maybe we don't even treat some animals, but we don't just annihilate everything. If it's sick, we let it go through the system and survive, and then we breed back the survivors. That's the way nature works, and that's how we build forgiveness genetics into our stock. So there's a lot of, you know, facets of this forgiving farming equation. But they deal with, you know, with soil, with building humus, with building perennial, with closing carbon cycling, with hydrating the landscape, with increasing immunity, all of that, and indeed increasing the salary for the farmer. You know, a cheap food system creates a very unforgiving farming system because it eliminates farmers. And when you eliminate farmers, then you have no food integrity and no loving stewards to massage this farm landscape and create the food that we want to eat. So all this works together to make a forgiving farm a resilient farm, and that's what we need to be busy about in these days.